Hola a todos. En la llamada de hoy contamos con interpretación simultánea. Una vez está activada, por favor de clic en el icono de interpretación, que es como un icono de un mundo. Esto va a abrir un menú y seleccione su idioma preferido y después seleccione silenciar el audio original para poder utilizar el sistema. Ahora nuestra intérprete Sandra explicará esto mismo, pero en inglés.
Good morning, everyone. Today's webinar will have the simultaneous interpretation feature. Once the interpretation has been activated, please look to the globe icon in your horizontal menu or look for the three-dot icon that says More and then select Interpretation. Select your preferred language and also select the option to mute the main audio. It is important that everyone selects a language so we can all participate. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Consortium for Scenario Planning's second peer exchange of 2024. I'm Madeline Hiller. I'm the program assistant for the planning practice and scenario planning team at Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. I support the Consortium for Scenario Planning along with Heather Hannon, our director for planning practice and scenario planning. As many of you know, we started peer exchanges a couple of years ago to allow for peer academics and scenario planning practitioners to meet, foster an exchange of ideas and information, and provide feedback on each other's projects. It's our hope to host 2 peer exchanges a year. This is our second one of 2024, and our next peer exchange will be in the spring, which will feature a presentation about Lincoln's scenario planning work for the future of water and agriculture in the Mountain West and Southwestern United States. Next slide, please. So for those of you who are not as familiar with the Consortium for Scenario Planning, we are a network maintained by the Lincoln Institute that seeks to develop scenario planning and apply it in communities of all sizes through research, peer-to-peer learning, training, and technical assistance. We run an annual RFP cycle where we finance scenario planning projects and research. This year's research is focused on scenario planning for disaster recovery and resilience. Next slide, please. We also host an annual conference, and this year's conference is in Deerfield Beach, Florida, from January 29th through 31st. Registration is now open and closes on January 15th. There will be a link in the chat for the webpage and registration. We also have a room block available at the venue in case you're interested in staying on site. And so to get into our presentation today, we are joined by a longtime Lincoln consultant, Giovanni Perez. Giovanni is from Colombia and is based in Argentina. He's a lawyer with studies in urban economy from the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy and the Universidad Torcado di Tella in Argentina. He also has training as a Scrum Master, Agile Teams Facilitator, Lego Serious Play Facilitator. He has worked extensively with both our Latin American and Caribbean teams and the scenario planning team at Lincoln Institute as a consultant and researcher. He's interested in the use of strategic foresight, serious games, and agile in public policies and citizen engagement processes. Today, Giovanni will be discussing a workshop that the Lincoln Institute held in collaboration with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Planning in Chile to help guide reconstruction efforts and policy changes in wake of the country's January and February 2024 fires. Along with this presentation, Giovanni has created a toolkit that outlines and kind of goes through the entire workshop process. And the link to that will also be in the chat. And so today we are going to chat about this workshop for about 25 minutes, which will be followed by a question and answer session. If you have questions come up throughout the presentation, please submit them in the Q&A, but those will be saved until the end. And please submit your questions in either English or Spanish, whichever is your native language. So without further ado, please welcome Giovanni as he presents on our workshop with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Planning.
Hi, thanks, Madeline, and thanks everyone for attending this webinar. We're really excited and happy to have us with you here today. We will really want to talk about this experience that we have this year in Chile, because it's kind of experimental, as you're going to see today. So, okay, let's start. I'm trying to fit the times, not to extend really long, to not being really long, like during my exposition. Okay, basically, I'm trying to start with a little icebreaker. You know, I'm a facilitator, so of course I'm all the time incorporating this kind of stuff during my presentations and my workshops. This is really easy, but what I'm going to ask you to imagine, to trying to have like an imagination mindset for a couple of minutes. And I'm going to ask you some questions, and please imagine what I'm trying to ask you to imagine. The first question is, where do you live? Do you really understand the place where you live, the city, the region, the network of cities that goes around your city? How is this place where do you live right now? How is it? And of course, it's a question you're going to answer to yourselves. But once you can visualize that place, for example, I live in Buenos Aires, so I'm actually trying to see how is this territory, this city, how it works. Once you have that image in your mind, the next question is, do you know or you're familiar with the usual hazards of that place? And by usual hazards, I mean, you know, the typical hazards that you have to face living in that city. For example, in Buenos Aires, we usually have a lot of we had heat waves during the summer, or we have sometimes really strong storms. I mean, if you live in the Caribbean, you know what a hurricane is. Or if you live, for example, in Chile, you know what an earthquake is. Or and that's what I'm meaning. Please think in the usual hazard that you are usually exist in the place where you live. How is that hazard? Do you have to live during a situation when that happens? What are your memories of that situation? Do you remember how do you feel? Do you remember your memories about your relatives or your friends going through that situation? So take a couple, just 10 seconds to try to remember that. How was it? And now I'm going to ask you, do you know the emergency response of your local or national or regional governments in case such a hazard occurs? I mean, for example, I can remember I lived in a city, I grew up in a city next to a volcano, and I remember these events of having ashes or tremors, and I remember that some recommendations, you know, to have like the emergency kit, or I remember a lot of things related to that event. But the question is, do you actually know how is the emergency response of your governments, and not only your governments, your communities, in case such a hazard occurs? Do you know what's going to happen when that event it's happen eventually? Of course, we don't want that to happen, but did you know how is that emergency response? And please imagine yourself and your family in such a situation. Of course, this is just imagination. I repeat, we don't want this to happen. But how is this? Do you think that your government is strong in emergency response situation? Do you have that your community it's ready for a situation like this? Do you think that even your own family, do you have this emergency toolkit? I mean, uh, think in this, how prepared you are for a situation like this one. Okay, and now eventually you go through a series of questions I made and through a series of images mentally that you probably think about, but we're going to make a little twist here. Now I ask you to take a look of one of these random events or hazards, fire, tsunami, earthquake, tornado, drought, landslides, or even an alien invasion. I know it looks like weird, but think about it. Take a look at one of these cards that represents different events or different kinds of hazards and pick one. And I ask you to pick the one that is least likely to occur in the place you live. Of course, all of us have alien invasion like the least likely, but you can choose another one. For example, you live in I don't know, in a city where you have a lot of snow, and think in fire, for example. Think in a random event, really, really far away, or with the least probability to occurrence in the place you live. Okay, so pick one and put it in your mind. And now imagine how it will be the emergency response in your city if this random hazard event occurs. How will be the government response to this random event you have in your mind? Imagine yourself, and imagine your families and relatives and friends going through a situation like this one, a situation and a hazard or an event that you never imagined to occur. Not only the situation itself, but probably also the intensity of the situation. Because that's exactly what just happened in Valencia in Spain. They are aware that they could have a flood, but not of the intensity that they have. So that also could happen. So imagine yourself and your family, your relatives, and even your goods, your house, through one of these events, random events. And after this, please imagine how is the emergency response of the government uh, trying to deal with a situation that they can't even imagine. Okay, how's that? How does that feel? How does that feel? How is that situation of seeing yourself through a situation that you never imagined, but you have to deal with it to survive? So okay, so this I think that what I'm trying to leave you, it's to think that eventually cities or governments or municipalities, we are used to handle some situations, of risk or of some risk scenarios. That's the technical expression. And we know that if we have a fire, if we live in a city that we have to face, like historically fires, then we have a plan for that because we are used to that. We know exactly what to do with less or more resources, but we have some idea of how to deal with fire. But uh, so we have a fire, then we have a plan for fires. But what happened if, as we just imagined, we have to deal with a really random situation that we couldn't even imagine before, like an alien invasion? It's just in a scenario, but imagine what if that happens? Then I guess that most of the governments, we don't have a plan to deal with alien invasion. Maybe some governments have, because we know that there are some extreme scenarios, and there are some extreme preparations, like the bolt of seeds and that of things, preparing mankind for really, really extreme situations. But just let us just say that there are some situations that we don't plan. We don't even envision that. So that this is one of the cases. But the other one is, what if we have to deal with a different fire? We are prepared for some kind of fire, and we have a plan for that. But what if we have to deal with a different fire? There's infinite probabilities or possibilities about how a fire could be. So we have an event that we could imagine, but it's a little bit or really different in intensity or impact or whatever. And then we have a plan for that, but it's not enough. And I think, and we've been talking about this last week with one of our Chilean partners of this experience, my guess is this is what the Chilean government has to deal with these fires of February of this year. They have a lot of institutions. Chile is one of the governments in the region that has more tradition of having strong institutions and having plans, and they have plans for fire that they review each year. They have authorities, they have enforcement authorities to deal with fire. But suddenly they had to deal with a fire. I'm going to talk about this in a minute. They had to deal with a different fire that they have even imagined, and that it's uncertainty. It's impossible to know. This is a quote I really like a lot of Peter Schwartz, of the futurist. And he says that in the real world, you never know in advance which future scenario will materialize. Sounds really obvious, but the point is that from the point of view from the public policymakers, it's impossible to envision all the possible scenarios and to deal and to from the beginning and to design a public policy that responds to infinite scenarios. That's impossible. So because in the real world, you never know in advance which of those scenarios is the one that's going to materialize. So let us speak a little bit about the fire, the event itself. So uh, this happens in the Valparaiso metropolitan area, which is the second biggest in population in Chile, a little bit more than 1 million of inhabitants. And this metropolitan area has some municipalities, of course, but the fire, specifically the fire, strikes in three different municipalities: Viña del Mar, Quilpué, and Villa Alemana. And it's a fire that its main characteristic is that it strikes areas of urban and rural transition zones. This is, the satellite image that you can access by Google, but this is a reconstruction of how strong the fire was in this area. So this fires starts here during this. This is a natural environment, special environment area, the Reserva Nacional Lago Peñuelas, and the Route 6068. And this is the place where the fire starts. Now we know that has an intentional beginning. There were arsonists, a couple of firefighters that start this fire to have to could in such a way that they could work more and have more income for that extra hours. It's really crazy, but it's actually this is the investigation found this couple of guys. But they start the fire here in the Route 68, and the fire followed the topography, follow this. This is an area between mountains, and it goes through that, and go to the other side. Really strong affected these urban areas here in Viña del Mar, here in Quilpué, and here in Villa Alemana. This is a quote from the reconstruction strategy plan. I'm allowed myself to read. The fire of February 2 and 3 in the municipalities of Valparaíso, Viña del Mar, Quilpué, and Villa Alemana, belonging to the Valparaiso metropolitan area, has been classified as one of the country's biggest disasters in the last 30 years. It had a great impact not only on the vegetation areas, but above all on the populated areas, where in addition to the loss of housing and equipment, the most regrettable event was the death of 134 people. These are human casualties in these areas. That's huge. It's a lot. So, this is another data which is related to the level of houses affected by these fires. And what they found, that our friends in the minister and working with other agencies locally and regionally, they made this cadastre of houses affected, and they found that they have like 4,784 no repairable houses. That's also a lot. And there are also a lot of houses that could have some level of affected in some way, and they could be repaired in some way. But we have 4,700 houses that they're no repairable at all. So these are some pictures of these fires, which, as you see, it was huge. It was affect a lot of a lot of these these neighborhoods, and this we being here in this street, which is really sad because a lot of people get trapped in this street. Some of them trying to escape from the neighborhoods, and some of them trying to get into the neighborhoods to rescue their relatives. So there was a lot of sad stories, a lot of casualties, and it's really huge impact in these areas. So after this, of course, the governments have to deal with the how to attend people, how to reveal, how to start planning the reconstruction or rebuilding process. So what we're talking here is uncertainty, because the Chilean government, they already have plans for fires, but the very scale of this fire are how different it was from what they previously imagined, leave them in a context of uncertainty. So the question is how to design or improve public policies, for example, urban planning policies or risk management policies or reconstruction or rebuilding policies in this context of uncertainty. And if you are familiar with scenario planning, which this is exactly our key aspect, our key question: how to deal with planning, how to deal with public policies or regional planning or transportation planning in context of uncertainty. So we believe that scenario planning is a tool or a framework, even a methodology. There are discussions about this, but let us say that it's a tool or a framework that allows complex systems like government and public policies to adapt in context of high uncertainty. So this is exactly what we did, but of course it has like some context. Actually, there at the beginning there was not just a workshop. There was a cooperation mission, a high-level technical cooperation mission agreed between the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy and the Ministry of Housing and Planning, MIMBU, to support the ministry in the post-fire care and reconstruction process. In particular, to support the ministry in the evaluation of some aspects of public policy, your urban planning, some aspects where Lincoln has a lot of experience. So there was agreed this high-level technical cooperation, and there was a team was assembled. Here are the names of my colleagues that belong to this team. A really high profile and senior consultants of the institute. And actually, this team was assembled, and we made two visits, two trips to the affected area in Valparaiso, one in April and one in May. But after the trip of April, we have a lot of meetings. Of course, what we do there was some reconnaissance visits to the affected areas. We go over there to see what happens. We have a lot of meetings and with officials and public servants from different agencies and different levels of government, from the national government, the regional government, which is a level of government in Chile, which is not new, but it's getting stronger now, and the municipal government. And we have even meeting with some local researchers and faculty members of the local university, the University of Playa Ancha, UPLA. And between the first travel and the second, actually, we have a lot of discussion and a lot of meetings trying to decide how it will be the best strategy for the Institute to add value to Minbu in this process and in this context. And at the end, it was decided that the Institute wants to cooperate with Minbu in a lot of aspects, but the kickoff for that cooperation process, it makes a lot of sense to run a full day scenario planning workshop, especially focused on public servants, not in all kind of stakeholders, but specifically focused a workshop to be run with public servants from different agencies of the Chilean government. So we like to talk about something we call the design parameters. Once you have this challenge of design a workshop with any framework, there are some key questions you have to answer, like how many people is going to attend, how many time do we have to run this workshop, where are we going to do it, what are the main objectives of this workshop. So this is we did that very thing here. We start talking with the partners about these design parameters, and we decided a focal question. As you know, it's the very first step in scenario planning, and that we agreed between all of us that that focal questions will be what advances should be implemented in public planning and reconstruction policies to minimize the impact of disasters and increase resilience by 2050. That's our our lighthouse, our beacon, where we're going to run the whole exercise. So we have also a temporal horizon, and this is really interesting because Chile also has a tradition with foresight, not necessarily with the scenario planning, but with probably with another frameworks, probably more related to the European school of foresight. But they have a lot of interest, and they have some areas of government actually running exercises of forecasting for the Chilean government. And we found that actually there was one of these exercises called Chile Creates Future, and envisioning that exercise that built scenarios to 2050. So as long as we already have a reference from the very Chilean government, we take that year for as our temporal horizon. Driving forces, we're going to speak about this a little in detail a little bit later, but we decided also some roles. We decided that we're going to divide our team into roles between facilitators in charge of executing the workshop, controlling the times, the steps of the methodology, managing the participation, and it was Herder and me. And the rest of the team, as long as they were senior consultants of the institute, they're going to be experts and also facilitators. They were in charge of supporting the discussion as co-facilitators also, but with a special emphasis in the final stage, the strategy stage of the workshop at the end, where it was like the perfect place for them to suggest action or courses of action according to their experience. So we decided that we have on the workshop we have 4 high-profile experts, and we divided the whole group in 4 groups, and each one of these experts co-facilitate in one of the groups. That goes pretty well. And we have, of course, you have to have in mind, you need to have in mind an approximately amount of attendees for these workshops, and we decided that it will be something around 40 participants, from most of them from MIMBU, from the Minister of Housing and Urban Planning of Chile, but almost a little bit less than the half from another agencies, from like the budget office, the National Service for Disaster Prevention. They have a new institution, which is the Institute for Disaster Resilience, and a couple, of attendees from other institutions. And we started looking our schedules and our agendas, and we decided that we have one day available for this workshop. So this is basically the run of show, how we did it, how we managed the time blocks to make that everything fits. As you know, scenario planning, it's a framework that has 3 basic steps, and it's pretty hard to run this in a whole day. But we have to deal with this constraint and start thinking how could we fix everything. So basically, what is important here is to say that we decided to put a lot of time in the describing a scenario stage and in the strategy stage, because in other experiences I get short of time at the end when the exercise. It's really important. It's when it's better. The best part of for me, the best part of a scenario planning workshop, it's at the end when everyone is ready to strategize. So it's kind of sad to get short of time at the end. So for that reason, we decided to put a lot of time in the strategy, but also a lot of time in the build and describing scenarios. But we have to deal with this question of how could we make the driving forces stage shorter, because as you know, as long as you gather a group of people and you start asking them questions about the future, and you asking about the driving forces, tends to be a really derivative and open discussion. So we have to deal with this challenge of how could we make this stage shorter. So this is basically like the symbols represent like each one of the steps of the workshop, like set a key question, create the scenarios, describe the scenarios, which is a typical divergence stage, and strategize, which is a typical convergence stage, and at the end an evaluation stage. So as I already read the key question, we decided that is going to be our key question about advances to be implemented in public planning and reconstruction policies. We picked two specific public policies with an objective to minimize the impact of disasters and increase resilience by 2050. So this is our key questions. And the way we found to deal with the time constraint during the driving forces stage was using the framework of Pestlett, thinking in our driving forces belonging to one of these categories as political driving forces, economic, social, technological, legal, environmental, or demographic. And we did a list. We found a lot of these driving forces in the document I already told you, the Chile Crea Futuro al 2050, Chile Creates Future. This is a public document of the Chilean government from a Chilean government agency. So we took some of the driving forces from this very document, and we made a list divided by these categories. See, this is just a glimpse of the list. I don't want you to read over there; it's impossible. But over here, it's impossible. But actually, we made a list of driving forces. We defined that driving forces, and once we have the list finished, we put this into cards. Cards, driving forces cards. And these cards, we gave them, of course, the name of the driving force, in this case, general economic status, the definition of the driving force, which in this case, you can see it. But we can also express the two extreme versions of this driving force. A world with good economic conditions or a good world with poor economic conditions. And we decided to give the participants this deck of cards, each deck, one deck by table, by group, one deck by group. We gave them these cards, but we also gave them blank cards in case they decide uh, to to pick a driving force not included in our list. They were not really that constrained. They could say, and actually that happened. A group say, okay, I have a different one. Okay, just put it in the blank card and go ahead. So this was really useful to help the group focused on the driving forces and not to have, a really not becoming the driving forces discussion in a really divergent stage of them talking about everyone. But it was really helpful for us to have these cards and to make that the group focus on the driving forces to discuss this list or new ones and pick. And that's what they made. Each group, we have 4 groups, and we ask each group to pick 2 driving forces from that cards or a new one they want to propose. So at the end, this is what we have when we put these cards into the uncertainty impact matrix. We have we put the 8 driving forces here, and we found that we have like 3 clusters of driving forces: interpersonal and institutional trust and social capital, which will be these two, education, social and human capital, creation of culture of resilience, more focused on education, and a third one, decentralization and interinstitutional coordination in relation to urban and territorial planning, with focus on decentralization. So we discussed, and at the end, we keep the number 1 and the number 3 as driving forces of our exercise. And with those huge driving forces, we could build the matrix of the scenarios, in one axis, interpersonal and institutional trust and social capital, and in the other axis, decentralization and interinstitutional coordination. So this is the result of our matrix. We built the 4 scenarios, and as long as we've been working with 4 groups, we assigned one of each. We assigned one scenario of one of each groups. We have 4 groups, 4 scenarios. That works pretty well. Here you see, like the good scenario, high level of interpersonal and institutional trust and a lot of decentralization. The opposite one, low level of interpersonal and institutional trust and little decentralization or coordination. And the two typical with nuances. Low level of trust, but a lot of decentralization, or high level of trust, but little level of decentralization. So we assigned this to the groups and we gave them this canvas. We designed a special canvas for this, which is for them. We designed two different canvas. The first one for them to put the ideas together in these categories. Of course, we asked them to name this scenario, which is an unusual practice. As you know, this is a very divergent stage where they have to imagine, to have an imagination mindset, to imagine this the word that was assigned to each group. And we gave them only for them to organize their ideas about how that word looks like, that the scenario that was assigned to them looks like in different dimensions, like quality of life, economy, politics, culture, technology, environment, and they put their ideas on the canvas. But we have a little more time in this stage because we really want them to wonder, or to imagine how that world will be. So we asked them to imagine how will be the front page of a newspaper in 6 May, exactly the date of our, our limit date, in 6th of May of 2050. How is the front page of a newspaper in my scenario in that date? How it will be? Which news is going to say, to include? What how is the headline of the diary the day? And this was a really interesting exercise. They really put the information into this format, and they explained to the whole group how are the news of that day into their own scenarios. This works pretty well. It allows them to imagine freely, and a lot, that the future of that scenario that was assigned to each group. We are here only seeing two of these newspapers, but they even, the idea was to have areas even for pictures for them to draw how are the pictures. I'm half an hour. Just give me please a couple 5 more minutes. And after that, we finish this stage of describing scenarios, and we start the strategy stage. And basically, we have another canvas for this, which probably you are familiar with this one because we've been working with this for a long time. But it was basically to ask them about actions. We don't want you to wonder anymore. We need you to change your mindset and now focused on action strategies, plans, projects, programs that could be adopted or strengthened to solve the problems of your scenario. What actions can be taken to anticipate or prepare for your future in short, medium, or long term? And something really important that sometimes we forgot in these kind of workshops or planning or scenario planning exercises, that is that we need to track. We need some tools to track, some indicators to know how long or close are we going to the scenario we are imagining. So that's the question. The other question: how do we know that this scenario is materializing? What are the key indicators to monitor it? To monitor that we are closing or getting far away from that scenario. This is really important. So they put their information in this canvas, and at the end, once each group shared to the whole group their strategies, we made a little of strategies, and this is the part when we start identifying the robust strategies. The strategies, because we have 4 groups working on their own way, without talking it between, having conversation between groups, and we start seeing that some of the strategies are repeated. Even some of them were proposed by the 4 groups. So this says something to us. This says something that this strategy is something that we should take a look, and set that signaling system set us to us that this is a robust strategy. So we put the whole list of strategies on a list, and we start looking the frequency of, or the group adhesion, the how strong the groups have affinity for one of these strategies, the group addition level. That's the way we call it. But for example, we see that in this case that evaluate, or deepen or rethink the current planning policy. It's a strategy that 3 of the 4 groups propose. Or for example, more participation. This is really interesting because we have a couple of strategies that all the 4 groups propose the same, which is more in the number 3, more participation and more democratic policies with more incident participation from citizens and more decentralization of everything, investment, coordination, resources. These are really robust or strong strategies as long as everyone from their own work proposed them. So with this in mind, what we did, but we could finish here the workshop, but we want to know more. And as long as we decided to put more time in this step or in this stage, we decided to give them these little cards, like little mini canvas to set to us to detail this strategy. So as long as we have 4 groups, we randomly assigned 2 of these strategies to each group, and we gave them 2 of these cards. And say, okay, guys, please say to us how's the name of that strategy or the strategic action, how's their time frame, what are the key partners you need to implement that strategy, what are the key resources you need, what are the key actions you have to take to make that real, and imagine some metrics or indicators for that strategy. So that's what the groups made. They fulfilled these cards, yeah, with their strategies. So at the end, we have 8 cards of this. We have 8 detailed strategies, and at the end, what they decided to what we proposed to the group is, okay, we have 8 cards. Why don't we? Why all of us come together, have a whole group conversation, and decided how could we arrange or distribute these 8 strategies together to build a plan or a big strategy. So this is what we made. They all come to the front of this place where we met when we were, and they decided to. We tried different solutions. They were discussing, and no, this I think this don't belong here, but here, because this, if you don't make this, you can make the other thing, until we get an agreement. And these 8 cards, put it translated into an image, is this. This is the decision of the work of the group from these groups during the whole day, that they decided that it's some kind of virtual cycle of prevention, which is invest in prevention, which actually should be an input to a better public participation system, with these 2 strategies. But that itself, it's an input for the decentralization governance strategy, and that also it's an input. It's a cycle of the planning system with these 4 elements: prevention, public participation, decentralization and governance, and planning system. And in the middle, this strategy of training, that build capacities for public servants in these things, in prevention, in public participation, in governance, in planning system. So it's like a transversal strategy to all the others. So this is like the image that resume the whole work of the day. That the stars represent the level of addition of the groups. If 4 or 3 or 2 groups propose the same strategy, that's what the star represents. So we put this. I don't pretend you to read this, but we put this information into a matrix, to compare each one by one the strategies with their temporal horizon and key allies and key resources, and we have some interesting results. For example, there's a key finding that you can see it in this graphic, that it's that many of the actions are completely and positively correlated between them, meaning that one of the key aspects of one strategy, it's another strategy itself. For example, in public participation, talks about decentralization. And decentralization, it's a strategy by itself. So they're really, at the end, we found that they were really correlated in a positive way. And for example, there are several proposals and references to, this is an example, are a lot of proposals to strengthening participation or decentralization, which, as I said, is the more, those are the two more robust strategies proposed by this group of people. So that's like a key finding, but we also found in the temporal horizon that almost all of these strategies are considered to be possible for execution in the short and medium term, 6 out of 8, that the decentralization and strengthening of local governance strategies are considered a medium-term time horizon, given probably their complexity and that they are part of more complex multi-actor processes. About key allies, in general, strategies consider multi-actor collaboration schemes for their implementation, with a lot of emphasis in communities and civil society, as well as various levels of government, which is consistent with the two most robust strategies. 7 strategies consider communities and civil. 7 of 8 consider communities and civil society as key allies. 6 strategies consider central government as a key actor. 5, the municipal governments, and 4, the regional government. 4 strategies consider the academy as a key ally, and 3 strategies consider the private sector as a key ally. In key resources, in general, there was a consensus that in considering that economic resources and human resources are the key resources for the whole thing, for the global strategy. And they're almost always considered, but it's important to say that human resources, it's a resource considered almost from the perspective of training and capacity building of capacities, as we see, which is consistent with the very one of the strategies, which is exactly that. And something interesting is that half of the strategies highlights the use of technology, big data, AI as a key resource in the future. And in key actions, the key actions tends to be institutional in nature and specific to each strategy. But despite that, it is possible to detect a couple of patterns, such as the formation of local capacities in disaster management and the strengthening of participation, which is completely current with the two most robust strategies. Again, we see a lot of that, a lot of these correlations. And also the need to strengthen disaster risk management, DRM, at different levels of government is also something really highlighted as a general pattern. And in key metrics, it's really hard to build metrics or indicators in an exercise in a day workshop. But it was important to see that the group was a lot of awareness about the importance of metrics, and evaluation systems. So it is really interesting for us to notice how interested they were in having mechanisms to monitor and evaluate these strategies. I mean, they're aware of that situation, and this is really important because it's something that sometimes is forgotten. So at the end, this is really short, and like we run after some days some weeks really after the workshop, we sent the participants a survey. We don't have enough responses, not a representative enough sample, but apparently we have some clues, some hints that they, for example, did you talk to someone new or hear a new perspective? The person that actually respond, they said all of them say yes. Or do you believe that this workshop will change the way you think or work going forward? And we have 9 of 10. I mean, these are interesting hints. And the workshop was evaluated in apparently good terms, and between good and excellent. And to finish, sorry, I know I take more time, but with this I'm going to finish, which is the learnings. Key lessons from the Chilean case. The success of this workshop, this specific experience I'm talking to you today, depended on the previous work we made, having visits, meetings, interviews, a lot of hours trying to understand the problem and the context. That is really important because prepared us really well to run this workshop. Also, another key aspect, it was to have a good partnership. We have a really good partners in Mimbu and our Chilean partners, because they were completely open, interested, active, and they providing us a space, not only a physical space, what they did, but with a space between their agendas and their, with a lot of people working on reconstruction, they decided to say, okay, let's let's go a little bit slower and go into this workshop to think. And a lot of people found that really interesting. We have a good group of attendees, diverse in genre, in ages, in professional backgrounds. They were really interested and focused during the whole workshop. A really good group, and we also have the opportunity to work to have detail in design. To prepare a lot to customize materials like the driving forces cars or all these canvas. We have time to make like a really customized workshop, but we believe that could be an experience that it could be replicable to other workshops. And XSP generates favorable conditions for dialogue between the participants and adds value to current institutional improvement processes that the ministry, that the MIMBU is actually doing in terms specifically of our urban planning and response to disaster. XSP, we believe, after this experience in Chile, we strongly believe that XSP and forecasting can be really used to challenge complex systems, as government and urban planning. As you know, we had a lot of experience, specifically in the consortium, running XSP workshop with communities, with the stakeholders, even doing really complex planning systems of urban planning or transportation through XSP. But here we use it in a slightly different way, which is to discuss public policies. So we found and we believe that XSP has a lot of potential doing this to challenge the public policy making process. XSP can teach people a different mindset and approach, which is no linear, because it's different to think in a public policy, doing step by step, that thinking in using a different, more systemic way, and XSP allow that. It's important. It's also important to take time in the strategy state. What I say that we believe that you need a lot of time at the end to get all the information that you've been working, like the whole process, not necessarily a day. And also we found that this workshop has like a team building effect. At the end of the day, we have like agents of forecasting, people that it's really interested in training even more in their forecasting mindset, and they're really interested in learn these techniques and these frameworks to improve their own work. So just these are some of the comments of the people that attend the workshop. I'm not going to read it because to this point everything sounds a lot of self-referential, and we think that it will be interesting to give them that voices, that you could read what they think about this exercise, and if they think that add value to them or no. So sorry, I know I take a lot of time, but please go ahead with question and answers. Sorry but we put some information. We put more information that we think at the beginning.
Thank you so much, Giovanni. We have some questions coming in the chat. And one of the participants is wondering what you mean when you say indicators and metrics. And if those are used to track the performance of a specific strategy or events that indicate which scenario is most likely to happen.
Okay, Madeline, thank you. Okay, I'm thinking in indicators. We are thinking in indicators in two different senses. The first one is probably more related to public policy evaluation. The stage, the typical evaluation stage that usually is teach that goes to the end. I don't believe that. I believe that you should start designing indicators and evaluating systems from the very beginning of the formulation of a public policy. But I'm thinking in metrics, indicators, and evaluation systems of public policies, because in this particular workshop we're talking about a lot of the strategies at the end were public policies by itself. But we also think in indicators in the way we use it in scenario planning, which metrics, existing metrics, I could see, or I could refer to see if I'm going close or far from the scenario I've been working for, or the scenarios we've been working for. There are existing metrics to do that. I can I can found reliable information to do that. For example, in the census, or or uh, metrics from universities, or third parties. But the question, the second way we talk about metrics and indicators here, it's the metrics and indicators that allow us to, to see what of these scenarios apparently is more close for us. So it's both ways, and in some ways, some of the indicators or metrics could belong these two categories at the same time. Could be indicators of tracking of a specific public policy, but at the same time, it could be useful for us to know if we are getting close to one of these scenarios we built and described.
Great, thank you. Another participant is asking if you could talk more about how to define driving forces in scenario planning.
Yeah, of course. Well, actually, yeah, we don't. There's no, like, the a book definition, but it's I found in my own experience that to define the better way. Oh, sorry. The better way to define driving forces is related to the key question. I mean, if you have a strong and a good key question, let me share again. In this case, for example, we have a good key question, which is, in this case, what advances should be implemented in public planning and reconstruction policies? You have a challenge, you have a question, and you have a timestamp for that. You have a temporal horizon. So for me, the best way to describe driving forces is what are the factors or forces or events or situations or trends that has more impact, but this is actually the definition, that has more impact and more level of uncertainty related to that question. In this case, what are the factors that could be the most of the impact on the public planning and reconstruction policies in the future, but also that we have more uncertainty. We have, more, that's precisely because when you run this exercise, this matrix, it's recommended to put all the driving forces. In this case, we're 8, but you could have 20, 30. And it's all the factors that you think that could affect the future of your question, And you can put it in this matrix, and after that, you have to decide, put it in it, what kind of impact of uncertainty has, and it's recommended to pick the driving forces when you less more about them, but they're going to have a lot of impact on the process of answering your question in the future. Okay, so it's you have the possibility to make infinite driving forces: economy, demography, technology. Something that is actually recommended. There's a lot of documents right now in the field about mega trends of trends of the future, and it's like this: the future of technology, new materials, new labor relationships, future of economy, future of migration, future of demography. You can put everyone in the table, but at the end, it's recommended that you only pick those, not necessarily two, but those that has a lot of impact of the answering of your question, but also that there's a high level of uncertainty. For example, technology or climate change. Those are a couple that usually have a lot of uncertainty because changes so fast. For example, technology, we could suspect that it's going to have a lot of impact in society, but it's changing so fast that we still have a high level of uncertainty about that in 25 years. So that will be the answer. Like all these factors that affect the development and or result or potential results of the questions you want to ask to yourself in the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Giovanni. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have today for questions. Giovanni, if you could go to the last slide in the presentation.
Yeah, of course.
We have some links for you all. If you're interested in learning even more about this workshop, the toolkit is online. I believe it's in Spanish, and we'll be having English version coming out in the next couple of months. So there's a QR code to download the toolkit, as well as a link if you'd like to join the Consortium for Scenario Planning's newsletter. In the newsletter, we announce things like peer exchanges. There's announcements about the conference, as well as different opportunities, hiring opportunities, RFP opportunities. So if you're not already on the newsletter list, please join. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And we hope to see you at the next peer exchange in the spring and maybe at the conference in January.